Git on Linux, you're going to use one of these two commands. And on Mac OS, if you just type git on the command line, it should go ahead and prompt you to install it. So if we're back in our command line and we just type git, it should prompt you to go ahead and install it. And if you do git dash dash version, you should get something that looks like this. You can also use a macOS Git installer by clicking this link here and running through the installation process. All right, now that you have Git and Visual Studio Code installed, we can continue on to the next section. Awesome. If you're not planning on using Windows or Gitpod, feel free to skip the next two sections. And then finally, our last setup is going to be using a tool called Gitpod. Starting from lesson 5, the lesson that we're on right now, Ethers.js Simple Storage, all of our code repos are going to come with a button. In the repo, if you scroll down, they'll come with this Open in Gitpod button. Now, Gitpod is a cloud development environment where you can actually run your code on a remote server. It's kind of similar to Remix IDE, but it allows you to run Visual Studio Code in the browser or connected to another server. This is good because then you don't have to do any installation on anything, since all the tools that you can want to use are just going to be running on this remote server. This has its downsides though, obviously, since you'll only be able to code if Gitpod is up and working for you. Additionally, when it comes to private keys, you absolutely do not want to run any code with a private key that has real money in it on Gitpod. Why? Well, once again, since you're running your scripts on a remote server, those servers have access to your private keys. But since you've pinky promised that for this course, you're not going to be using a MetaMask or a private key with actual money in it, it should be fine. The other downside is that these often cost money to use, and Gitpod isn't free, but it's an option if you absolutely cannot get any of the installation working. So if you go ahead and you hit this Open in Gitpod button, you'll get a welcome to Gitpod showing up. We're going to go ahead and continue with GitHub since you've signed up for GitHub here. You'll want to go ahead and authorize Gitpod. And it'll go ahead and start creating this workspace for you. And you'll notice it looks exactly like Visual Studio Code. Since I opened the repo up in Gitpod, it came with all the code. And you can even open this workspace up in VS Code Desktop. So this might be a little bit confusing, but basically you can run off of Gitpod using your local Visual Studio Code. And if you see Gitpod here, that's how you know that you're running off of Gitpod. If you see this pop up, do you want to open this workspace in VS Code Desktop? You can hit open and it'll ask you if you want to open up Visual Studio Code, which I'm going to go ahead and hit yes. And you'll get something that looks like this on your Visual Studio Code. It'll tell you that it wants to install the Gitpod extension and then open that Gitpod URL. So you can go ahead and install it, reload window and open. And it's going to go ahead and start connecting to the Gitpod workspace. And this is going to be the same as running Gitpod in the browser here. Or you can also do it manually by hitting the Gitpod in the bottom left and then type in open in VS Code. And then you should be able to run it in your Visual Studio Code. For now, I'm going to recommend that if you're using Gitpod, just stay in the browser, just so that you know, okay, I am running this on a remote server, and just as a reminder for you that you're not actually locally developing. And hopefully this will be a trigger to not actually put any special private keys or anything like that. But you can make workspaces, you can make new folders, and you should be able to run all the commands on here as if you were running locally with Visual Studio Code. To open up the terminal, you can hit this little bar in the top left, go to terminal, new terminal, or use Control tilde, the exact same as Mac OS and Linux keyboard shortcuts. To create a new folder, we can change directory, cd dot dot, mkdir, new folder. Mkdir makes make directory called new folder. And then we're going to change our directory into new folder and hit enter. And now we're in that new folder. For each section, you can either open up the entire. And if you're using Windows, this should say WSL or Ubuntu or something like that. And if you have all that, that means we're ready to go. Now, a quick note, something that you'll see me do a lot, and you can do this as well. Oftentimes, when my terminal gets really, really big, or there's a ton of commands in here, it gets a little bit overwhelming for me. So one thing that you can do is you can type clear and hit enter to clear it. Or what you can do is you can hit Command K if you're on a Mac, or Control K if you're on a Linux or a Windows. And it's one of my favorite keyboard shortcuts that I use all the time. Additionally, the trash can and the X here are very different. If I go do a couple of enters here and we're down here, if I hit the X here and then pull my terminal back up by doing the toggle or by doing terminal, new terminal, you'll see all those lines are still here. But if I hit the trash can and then pull the terminal back up, you'll see it actually refreshes. Mine is a special command that prints stuff out. Trashing your terminal is basically deleting whatever's running in it, and the X is just hiding it. And it's hitting Control tilde or toggling our terminal or whatever command it is on your environment to hitting the hide, not the trash. So if we want to remove and start. So after we have that set up, the next thing that we're going to want to install is actually Foundry itself. In the Foundry book, you can find this in the installation tab, or you can go to getfoundry.sh. And it'll have this command that you can actually just go ahead and copy. Windows users, we're going to teach you how to do it the Linux or Mac OS way, so just stay tuned. So we're going to go ahead and copy this and run this command. Again, we can go terminal, new terminal, and there are also some shortcuts to do this. I'm just going to go ahead and paste this in here and hit enter. You will need internet access for this to work because it's actually downloading Foundry from this website. And let me just move this up, zoom in a little bit here. And you'll see me do this a lot. In the terminal, I'll type clear a lot to remove anything that's been coded or output in our terminal here. Or you'll also see me do Command K like that, which clears the screen. When I'm typing in the terminal, you'll see me hit Control W a lot, which actually removes the most recent block of code you've written. You'll also see me do Control U, which deletes the entire line. So I'm going to use Command C for copy and Command V for paste a lot. For those of you on Windows and Linux, it might be Control C and Control V. And if you're unfamiliar, you can Google the keyboard shortcuts for copying and pasting for Windows or Linux. If you're on a Windows, these keyboard shortcuts might be a little bit different. We've got a list of keyboard shortcuts in the Git repo associated with this course. But if you've just run that curl command, you'll see an output at the bottom down here that says something like detected your preferred shell is whatever your shell is here and added Foundry up to path. Run source or simply start a new terminal session to use Foundry up. And once you run that, we can go ahead and run Foundry up, and this will actually install and update Foundry. And once you run that, we can go ahead and run Foundry up, or simply start a new terminal session to use Foundry up. And once to run that, we can go ahead and run Foundry up. And this will actually install and update Foundry to the latest version. Now, whenever we want to install and update Foundry, we can just run Foundry up like this. It'll automatically install everything. And Foundry comes with 4 components: Forge, Cast, Anvil, and Chisel. We'll know we've installed these right if we run Forge -- version, and we'll see an output that looks something like this. Now, something important to note, if you hit this trash can in the top right, this actually kills the terminal. It's different from the X, which is just close the panel. If we close the panel and then we reopen our terminal by hitting terminal, new terminal, like this actually creates a new terminal, which we can kill like this, but our old terminal is still up. In order to actually delete this terminal, we have to hit the trash can. Now you want to try this out now. Delete your terminal like we just did, open up a new terminal and run Foundry up. If this doesn't run, we might have an issue with your path and you might need to add Foundry to your path. If this is an issue that you have, please make a discussion on the GitHub repo associated with this course. Or check. Please first check this lesson 6 of the GitHub repo associated with this course, and we'll add some debugging tips to make sure that that does indeed happen. Or if there is no debugging tips here, make a discussion on the course. But first, be sure to check to see if that discussion already exists. And you should be able to do Forge -- version. However, what can happen is if you trash can the terminal and open up a new terminal, if you run Forge -- version now, it might say Forge command not found. This means that you have to rerun this command, this source command that Foundry told us to do. If you're working with Bash, most of the time, this bash RC file automatically gets loaded, but sometimes it actually won't, depending on what your setup is. If this happens for you, another thing that you can do is you can type cd and go to your home directory and type this line, echo source, and then whatever Foundry up told you to do, $.bash profile. That's what we would want to echo. However, this will change to for double like this. Otherwise, you could override whatever's currently in your bash profile. Now, I'm going to give you a command that if you screw up, you could accidentally override some stuff. If you've never used bash profile before, you kind of don't have to worry about it though. The other command you can run is something like this. If you do get an issue, we can just ask an AI something like, if this happens to you, if you run Forge -- version, and instead of getting an output, you get something like command not found, ask an AI or ChatGPT.
This says that you have installed Foundry. Now, there is something interesting over here. It says that it detects that my preferred shell is CSH. Remember, because I did the personalization, in your case, is going to tell you that your preferred shell is Bash if you didn't go through the personalization. But for that, you just need to get the information from it. So I just can copy this, the command provided here. Easy, right? We can check it, everything worked fine with a simple Forge version. Something that you are going to be using on other courses in Forge init. By default, this is going to create a project for me, but I'm going to have this strange error over here. Global username is not set your default account, we don't know what your identity is, and more. So first thing first, Git comes pre-installed on WSL, but it doesn't come configured. And this is why we are having this problem on Foundry. So for that, we need to configure our username and email on WSL. To make that a reality, we need to use git config -- global, the user.name. It's going to be Cronware in my case. You can use any username you like. And then we need to configure the git config dash dash global user.email and use the email you'd like to use. In my case, this one. Hit enter, and notices that you have that configured. To test this out, let's create a new folder. Pretty easy, and I'm going to show you how to do it. Once we have the basic configuration of the username and the email, we can set local account, hit enter. This is going to request you to confirm the place this SSH key is going to be generated. I'm just going to hit enter. Then it will require you a passphrase. Let me add that. Remember, on Linux, passwords are hidden by default. And once you have that, this is going to successfully generate that key for you. Getting that key is actually a really straightforward and easy process. You just need to clear the terminal and say cat ~/.ssh/id ed25519.port. Return this key. I'm just sharing this with you right now because
Now also the control backtick shortcut toggles the terminal visibility between up and down. I also have Command J as a toggle for panel visibility as well. This is a key binding that you'll see me use pretty often because we often will flip back and forth between the terminal and our code, which is going to be up here. In fact, if we click this Explore button on the left, we can select this area, select New File, do something like hello.txt, or better yet, hello.sol, and we can add some code in here. What's important to know is if you see this white dot in the top section here, this means that this file isn't going to make that white dot by hitting Command S and selecting delete. Little box looking thing that says extensions, you get a search box which allows you to search for extensions. The AI that I work with the most is GitHub Copilot, but you can use whatever AI you want, or you could just not even use an AI. GitHub Copilot does cost money to use, so feel free to also not use it. There's some other free VS Code extensions that use AI. So feel free to browse around and choose which one you like. For me, I'm going to go ahead and install GitHub Copilot. You'll get a little guy in the bottom right for your VS Code that will let you know that you've done it correctly. You'll need to sign into GitHub, which is something that we've recently made, in order for it to work. Now, you'll see me using GitHub Copilot pretty often when I write my code. Because I have this little doodad on Down here, I can start writing some code, and GitHub Copilot will start giving me suggestions as to what I should write. For example, if I were to add SPDX license identifier, GitHub Copilot actually automatically starts to gray out and give me a suggestion. If I hit tab, I can auto-complete my code with GitHub Copilot suggestion. Alternatively, what I could do, then for example, I could keep coding, and I can see it's already giving me a suggestion here. And if I hit up key enter, I'll actually open up this bit on the side where GitHub Copilot will give me a ton of different solutions on what it thinks I'm trying to write, and I can just pick one of these solutions. Obviously, some of these aren't doing anything. We'll learn about the command palette soon, and we can also use any of the GitHub Copilot commands that come with the command palette. An alternate to VS Code is a tool called VS Codium. So VS Code is a tool that's owned by Microsoft, and it sends up telemetry data up to Microsoft. So basically, it can send data about ways to make your experience better with VS Code. For people who have a more security mindset, this is an open sourced version of VS Code that I highly recommend you check it out. Another extension that you might want to add is GitHub Copilot Labs. GitHub Copilot Labs has AI features that are experimental, so it might be worth installing as well. All right, fantastic. At this point, you should be 100% set up with Visual Studio Code and Git. If you're using Gitpod, that's great as well. And if you're using Windows, you should be 100% using WSL, because the rest of the commands are only going to work if you're using WSL, and we're only going to be working with Linux, Bash, or ZSH commands moving forward. If you want to be a hardo, like I was saying, do everything in PowerShell, that's great too. Moving forward, what I want you guys all to do is open up your terminal, the different ways I showed you, and create a folder by typing in mkdir foundry -f23. And then you do cd foundry f23. You'll notice something else I do a lot is I'll type the first couple letters of the folder I want to go into, and then I'll hit tab, which will auto-complete a lot of stuff for you in the terminal. Sometimes it doesn't work, you'll get better at figuring out what auto-completes and what doesn't. If I hit enter, this means I'm now inside of my Foundry F23 folder, and I can run commands inside of this folder. Moving forward, I want you to put all of your repositories inside this folder. This way, moving forward in the future, when you start actually working on projects in real life, you can refer back to this folder and refer back to code that you wrote and refer back to your notes to make sure that you understand stuff moving forward. Originally, I had set up this F23 to stand for, this is the Foundry 2023 edition. However, we've gone back and we've updated everything, and we decided to just keep the F23 so that we don't have to change all the links. So now the F23 just kind of doesn't mean anything. So you can ignore that F23 moving forward. We've got git -- version, forge -- version. We have cast -- version, which cast came with Forge and Foundry. We have Anvil -- version. And we also have chisel dash dash version. And all right, now that we have everything set up, let's go ahead and start creating our simple storage project in a professional environment. This is going to be the exact same environment that the big protocols use. These are the environments that Uniswap, Aave, Curve, etc., these billion-dollar groups use. You are learning the exact same tools as them. Additionally, for those of you who are interested in security and auditing, Foundry is the most popular tool amongst auditors. So for those of you who want to become security researchers, you're going to learn the exact same tools that the best of the best use. You ready? I sure am. So let's go ahead and create a new folder inside of this folder here. To do this, we're going to type mkdir foundry simple storage f23. And then we're going to cd into foundry simple storage f23. And you'll notice I hit tab there to autocomplete again. Now everyone's terminals are going to look a little bit differently. Mine tells me the exact path of the folder that I'm in, but I have a alias called video shell, which just shows me the current folder that I'm in. And I'm going to use that for the rest of the video. So if you see my terminal look like this, it means I'm at this location. Now, if you're inside of this folder, you can actually type in code and then hit a period, and then you should get a new Visual Studio Code, which is now defaulted to that folder. If you don't, you can also hit File, Open Folder, and select the folder that you want to open, which will also open up a new Visual Studio Code inside of that folder. If you open up your terminal now, you'll see that we are indeed in the folder for this project. And now on the left-hand side over here, this Explorer piece, we create a file, you'll see it pop up in the left-hand side of our Explorer. Touch is a command to create or touch a file. And we can go ahead and click it and type stuff in this file. Now, all these cd and mkdir and all these commands are known as bash or zsh or like Linux terminal commands. And we're going to be using them a lot throughout this course. If you want, it's a great lesson on working with bash and cch and Linux commands on the FreeCodeCamp YouTube. But at the same time, most of the time, ChatGPT and most AI, you can absolutely continue on with the course as is and just use AI to augment you. But for those of you who want to get more knowledge, definitely check that out. And again, the reason I have this dash F23 is to let everyone know that this is associated with the Foundry 2023 course. But awesome, we can actually begin getting set up with our own local environments similar to that Remix VM that we saw when we were working with Remix. We can work with our own local blockchain and do a bunch of stuff locally. As you can tell by the name of this project and from what I was saying earlier, this is going to be our simple storage project, but coded with Foundry, which again is a smart contract development framework that's going to make our deployments and interactions with the code much more professional. To get started with Foundry, what we can do is we can open up our Explorer to see what's in here. Let's go ahead and delete hi.txt, move to trash. I'm going to do my video shell command here, which won't work for you, but it works for me. What we're going to do is we're going to run a command to create a new Foundry basic project for us. And if you go through the Foundry documentation, this is going to be basically this creating a new project section of the documentation. And if you want to follow along with the documentation, you can do that as well. But to do this, we're just going to run forge init like this. And we'll see it created a ton of folders over on the left-hand side for us. If you run into an error because you accidentally have some files in here, for example, if I run forge init right now, it's going to say, oh, it's not an empty directory. What we can do is type forge init -- force period to say, let's do it in this directory, hit enter. And it's actually going to give us an error because it's going to go, hey, it already has everything that I was going to do. So it's just not going to do anything. But if you have files in here already, you just add this -- force piece. Now, if you get a different error about Git, Vasily is actually going to help us triage that. So take it away.
And we are getting this error, and this is pretty common, don't worry. The reason is because even though Git comes pre-installed on our WSL install, we still have to configure or run that command again.
Where we're going to put all of our smart contracts that we want to deploy. Right now, it comes packed with this counter.sol, which we're also going to delete, move to trash. And then we also have tests, which we haven't learned about yet, but we will. And for now, once again, you guessed it, we're going to go ahead and right click and delete. Source is going to be the main section that we're going to be working with. SRC stands for source. And you'll see in a lot of projects, this is where they put all of their main contracts. Test is where we're going to put code to test what's in SRC, and script is where we're going to put code to interact with our contracts that are in SRC. Git ignore is going to be files that we're not going to push up to GitHub if we push our code to GitHub, which is going to be really important. Git modules, we can ignore for now. I'll teach you about that later. And founder.toml is a file that is going to give us configuration parameters about working with Foundry. And as we go along in this course, we're going to update this folder because we're going to update how we're going to work with Foundry. Now, for us to get started here, we're going to add our simple storage code into the SRC or source folder. If you close your Remix, we can just come on back to the repo associated with this course. We'll scroll down to the Remix simple storage, select the code base. Now also the control and we'll go in here and just copy all simple storage, select the code base. We'll scroll down to the Remix simple. Storage, select the code base, and we'll go in here and just copy all the code in here. Come back over to VS Code, and in SRC, we'll right click, new folder, simple storage.sol. Paste it in here and hit save. Now, one of the first things that you'll notice is this is formatted horribly. It's just all white text. This cute little ETH actually will format our Solidity code for us. And of the Hardhat Solidity extension, even though Hardhat is another framework, it also can format our code in Foundry. Another one that a lot of people like is the Solidity Visual Developer. So that's another option if you want to use that one. And this one by Juan Blanco is probably the most used on the planet. But we're going to go ahead and hit install. To install this Nomic Foundation Solidity VS Code extension. And if we go back to our simple storage.sol, you'll see it is now formatted with syntax highlighting similar to what we saw in Remix. If it doesn't automatically highlight for you here, what we can do is hit Command Shift P or Control Shift P which opens up our command bar here. And we can type in settings, and we want to open our user settings in JSON. You can also hit code and then settings as well. In here, and a lot of you might have nothing in here. So what you can do is you create these little brackets to say, hey, whatever is in here is going to be our new settings. And we want to type these little quotes, these little brackets, and say Solidity like this, little colon here, some more brackets. And since I'm using GitHub Copilot, it's even starting to give me suggestions, which I'll explain much later. But we could do editor dot, but you could paste in this editor.defaultformatter Gnome Foundation.hardhat Solidity. I'll have this code in the repo associated with this course, so you can just copy paste this if you want to. I've got a whole bunch of other stuff in here, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this though. But that way your Solidity code will default format using that hardhat extension that we just installed. Great. Additionally, this foundry.toml file also isn't formatted very well. So we'll go to extensions, we'll type in toml, and we'll install this better toml here. We'll close this. Now, if we go to foundry.toml, we'll see this is now highlighted very nicely too. Great. Now just remember, whenever you see this little dot here, this means that it's not saved. So hit Command S or File Save and do that a lot. The other thing that's really good about us adding that default formatter is in our code here, maybe this isn't formatted very nicely, right? Maybe we've got this over here and this over here, and it's kind of right, File Save. Whenever you see, this is now highlighted very nicely too. Great. Now just remember, whenever you see this little dot here, this means that it's not saved. So hit Command S or File Save and do that a lot. The other thing that's really good about us adding that default formatter is in our code here, maybe this isn't formatted very nicely, right? Maybe we've got this over here and this over here, and it's kind of not looking very nice here. If I go ahead and save without formatting, it'll save it here. But what we can do is if we add that auto formatter, now if we do Command Shift P, again, that brings this up, this command palette up. You can also get it by hitting View Command Palette, and we type format document. It'll format our code automatically depending on what formatter we're defaulting to. Since we opened our JSON and we defaulted to the Solidity hardhat, it'll automatically format with that. If your code isn't auto formatting, that's okay. Don't worry about this too much. Be sure to use AI, a web search, and the forums to get your formatting good. The other thing that I like to do is we'll go over to settings again. We're not going to go to the JSON. We're going to open the user settings and we're going to type in format on save, and we'll check this box on. This way, every time we save, it'll automatically format. So if I have this and I hit save, it'll automatically format my Solidity code for me. If I don't want it to format, again, we open the command palette with Command Shift P or View Command Palette, and we can say save without formatting, and it'll save it. See, the white dot is gone and it will not be formatted. But I'm going to save and reformat it because I like it formatted. And just a note, we pretty much never want to open these default settings, JSON, so avoid that one. All right, great. And just with this little pieces of code and Foundry installed, we can go ahead and compile our simplestorage.sol right in our terminal. So what we can do is we pull up our terminal and we can type in forge build or forge compile. And this will compile our code like so. Once we compile, we see a couple new folders show up. One of them is out, and this file in out has all the different information that the Remix compiler would have. For example, it has the ABI. If we go back to Remix, we go to the compiler tab, we go to one of our contracts, we scroll down, we can see we have the ABI section, or it's also in the compilation details. In VS Code, we can even click this little drop down thing next to it, and it'll minimize the ABI, and we can see the rest of this stuff like bytecode, method identifiers, and all this other stuff, which we'll learn about later. We also get this cache folder. This is a folder that you would basically ignore. Now, anytime in our terminal we hit up, we can actually cycle through commands that we've recently run. So if I run some crazy long command like this echo here, which is a bash command, don't worry about it, and I want to run it again, I can just hit up.